My name is Clarabelle Thornton. The night my sister told me to find another table because I wasn't real family, laughter erupted around me, and then they slid me the $3,500 bill. I paid it in silence, my hands shaking, but inside, something shattered forever. The clink of silverware and the low hum of conversations filled the restaurant. But for me, the sound blurred into a hollow buzz after Elaine's words cut through the air. My chair scraped softly as I stood, careful not to show how my knees trembled. I walked the few steps to a table near the bar, each click of my heels punctuated by whispers and sidelong glances from strangers who had heard enough to piece together the humiliation. I sat down alone, folding my hands in my lap, feeling the weight of their stares heavier than any chandelier above me. From where I sat, I could still hear them. Victor boasting about his investments, Harold chuckling at some story he'd told a dozen times before, Margaret praising Elaine for her taste in wine. Their laughter swelled again, as though sending me away had been nothing more than entertainment to them. When the plates were cleared and dessert forks clattered against porcelain, I braced myself for the final sting. The waiter approached, hesitating slightly before placing the bill in front of me. My eyes dropped to the numbers scrawled across the paper. $3,500. A sharp breath caught in my throat. Elaine leaned back in her chair, her smirk deliberate, and said in a tone sweet enough to be venom, "Go on, Clarabelle. Consider it a little thank you for all the years we kept you under our roof." My fingers shook as I slid my card into the folder, my signature wavering across the slip. I forced a smile at the waiter, trying to mask the burn of shame rising in my chest. When I handed the folder back, I felt something inside me harden. That moment, their laughter, the bill, the look of triumph in Elaine's eyes, etched itself into me like a scar. I left the table with my head high, but inside I carried a vow as sharp as broken glass. They would never again decide my worth. I grew up with reminders carved into every moment that I didn't belong. On Victor's 16th birthday, the driveway gleamed with a brand new car, neighbors gathering to admire it, while I trudged miles to school in shoes that let the rain in. Elaine was given dresses wrapped in tissue paper, colors bright and untouched, while I pulled on garments that smelled of closets and mildew, their seams worn before they ever touched my skin. When I asked what I could study or what I might become, the answer was never encouragement. It was a clipped reminder to be grateful you have a roof at all. If it hadn't been for Eleanor, I might have accepted their version of the truth. She was the only one who saw me, the only one who came to my graduation and pressed a book into my hands, her voice steady in the noise of a crowded gym. "You don't need anyone to grant you worth, Clarabelle. You'll build it yourself." That sentence stayed with me, a seed that outlived every dismissal. Eleanor rarely interrupted the family's cruelty, but her eyes were always there, sharp, attentive, as if she was quietly recording each wound. Her gaze alone reminded me I wasn't imagining what was happening. That night at the restaurant, I had braced myself to slip out unnoticed once the bill was paid. My humiliation felt complete, and I wanted only to escape. But the scrape of Eleanor's chair startled the room into silence. She stood, cane planted firmly, her voice filling every corner. "I won't sit by and watch you tear Clarabelle down another second." The chatter died. Forks froze mid-air. My chest tightened as she reached into her bag and withdrew an envelope stamped with a seal. "I signed a new will yesterday," she declared. "Every property, every company, every share belongs to Clarabelle. None of you will inherit." The words landed like a thunderclap. Victor's glass slipped from his hand and shattered across the floor. Elaine's jaw fell open, her face twisting in disbelief. Harold and Margaret's expressions drained of color. My pulse roared in my ears, as if my own body didn't know how to hold such a shock. In that instant, the elegant restaurant ceased to be a place of chandeliers and wine glasses. It was an arena, and I was no longer pushed to its edge. I had become its center, the eye of a storm that had been building for decades, now ready to break. The announcement from Eleanor spread like a brush fire, and within days my phone was flooded. Victor's texts came first, Clipped threats that morphed into outright accusations. Elaine's followed, dripping venom disguised as outrage. Then Victor's voice cut through one evening, sharp and cold. "Clarabelle, this charade won't hold. We're taking you to court. Haven't you embarrassed us long enough? Now you want to rob us too?" I sat alone in my Portland apartment, the glow from the streetlights painting stripes across the walls. The words stung, though not because they surprised me. I had always been the scapegoat, the expendable one. But now, exposed in the daylight of truth, I was suddenly cast as a thief. The tabloids wasted no time feeding the frenzy. Magazine covers screamed, "Adopted daughter snatches fortune," and "Angel or gold digger." Paparazzi captured photos of me grocery shopping, of me stepping out of my office, each frame weaponized into proof of whatever story they wanted to tell. Online, strangers dissected my life with glee, their comments a chorus of judgment. The first real blow landed when I learned Victor had hired a private investigator to comb through every corner of my past. The second followed quickly. Elaine, perched in a TV studio, voice-breaking as she insisted to millions of viewers that I had manipulated Eleanor's fragile state. The host nodded gravely. The audience murmured in sympathy. Watching from my apartment, I felt like the villain in a play written by someone else, trapped in their script. But then, the turn I never expected. One late afternoon, Eleanor summoned me to her study at the house by Lake Oswego. Papers lay spread across her desk, heavy with ink and evidence. She slid the folder to me. "Clarabelle," she said quietly, "you need to see this. Harold and Margaret didn't just mistreat you. They stole from you $600,000 your parents left for your care and education. They spent it all." I flipped through the statements, my chest tightening with every line. Tuition for Victor's private school, airfare for Elaine's European vacations, renovations to the family home, all drawn from funds meant for me. For years, I had wondered if I was ungrateful, if maybe my wounds were imagined. But staring at the figures, I knew the truth. I hadn't just been denied affection, I had been robbed the moment my parents died. The next morning, I sat by Eleanor's side. Her hands trembled as she lifted her teacup, her voice thinner than before. I asked the question that had sat heavy on my tongue all night. "How long have you known?" Her sigh carried the weight of years. 2. I had my lawyer investigate quietly. I couldn't accuse without proof. "Clarabelle, this was never about money alone. It was about how they used you, how they built their lives on what was yours. And I refused to leave this world with that lie still standing." Her gaze held mine, unwavering despite the shadows under her eyes. "The doctors say it's stage 4, pancreatic. My time is short, but before I go, I want justice for you." Her words cut deeper than any insult Victor or Elaine had ever hurled. Relief that she had always seen the truth collided with the grief of knowing I would lose her soon. She reached for my hand, her grip frail but firm. "We'll do it together. A press conference. All the documents, all the evidence, laid bare for everyone to see. You will not be silent anymore." I looked at her, frail but unyielding, and something sparked inside me. For the first time in decades, I felt hope rise above the ache. This time, the world would hear me. This time, justice would not be theirs to twist. The rain that morning felt like a warning, small, cold pricks against my coat as Eleanor and I stepped into the packed conference room. Cameras blinked like a constellation turned hostile. Microphones reached for us as if they could pluck the truth from the air. I sat by her side, fingers clenched around the armrest, listening as Caldwell arranged the documents so the lenses could not miss them. Bank statements, notarized transfers, medical evaluations that proved what Eleanor had long insisted was true. When she spoke, her voice was steadier than I felt. She named the small cruelties that had followed me for decades, then pushed the paper forward and said plainly that money meant for my upbringing had been diverted. The room held its breath. For once, private injury had become public record. Then Elaine burst into the doorway, mascara streaking down her cheeks, outrage dripping from every syllable. She pointed at me and accused, loud, performative, desperate. Cameras hungrily captured every tremor in her voice. Instead of shrinking from the spectacle, Eleanor leaned close and murmured, "See? They undo themselves." The word felt like a match struck in the dark. I sat there as the world watched the wound finally expose its raw edges. The video of Elaine's outburst went viral before dinner. Social feeds filled with people who had never known me suddenly offering sympathy, while others dug for dirt. 3 days later, the family's lawyer filed a suit accusing me of coercion and undue influence. The narrative flipped on its axis. The defender became the accused. Then came the rumors. An alleged rendezvous with a wealthy client. Hints of impropriety that required no proof to sting. Anonymous tips. Opportunistic reporters. Venomous headlines. Each one a calculated blow. One night, a man's voice warned me to walk away or be exposed. My hands trembled. Not from fear alone, but from fury I'd long kept tamped down. Caldwell spread our evidence across Eleanor's coffee table and spoke with the bluntness of someone used to storms. "They'll manufacture noise. We answer with facts." Watching Eleanor rest, her breath shallow but her gaze unchanged, I felt the shape of what we were fighting for. Not money, but the truth about who I had always been. This time, I would not be quiet. The courthouse gleamed in the sunlight, but inside the courtroom, the air was thick with tension, heavy as if it could be carved with a knife. I wheeled Eleanor to our table, Caldwell walking beside us with a quiet authority that steadied me. Across the aisle sat Harold, Margaret, Victor, and Elaine. Their suits pressed, their expressions sharpened into daggers of resentment. Their lawyer rose first, voice smooth yet cutting. He painted me as a manipulator, a parasite who had preyed on an old woman's fragility. She exploited Mrs. Hayes's weakness, bending her judgment to steal what was never hers, he said, his gaze skewering me as if daring me to deny it. Each word ignited anger and grief in equal measure, because the truth was simpler. I had never wanted their money. Only acknowledgement. Only justice. Caldwell stood with calm precision. He stacked the evidence high and opened each binder for the court to see. Bank records traced the theft of $600,000, withdrawn and redirected to cover Victor's tuition, Elaine's travels, Harold and Margaret's comforts. Witnesses testified to the years of cold shoulders, the humiliations I had endured. Then came the medical records, clear proof of Eleanor's sharp mind when she signed her will. But it was the video that broke the room wide open. On the screen, Elaine shrieked before reporters, her voice shrill and echoing, "We deserve that money! We raised her!" The words reverberated through the chamber, a confession laid bare. I watched her pale at her own reflection, lips trembling. I rose, my voice fragile but steadying with each syllable. "I am not here to steal. For 30 years, I have been invisible in the only home I had, pushed from family photos, mocked in hand-me-downs, denied even a small request for tuition. All the while, what my parents left me was spent on their own children. Today, I ask only this, that I be seen as someone worthy of justice." The silence that followed was immense. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, but I did not waver. Judge Morrison leaned forward, her silver hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights, her eyes sharp with finality. "Having reviewed the evidence and testimony, this court finds the will valid. The estate is awarded in full to Claribel Thornton. Harold and Margaret Hayes are ordered to repay the misappropriated $600,000, with interest bringing the total to $1.8 million. This case is closed." Her gavel struck. The sound was both thunder and release. Across from me, Harold collapsed into his chair, as if the weight of years had finally crushed him. Margaret buried her face in her hands, sobs muffled against the wood of the table. Victor bent his head, all bravado drained away, and Elaine leapt to her feet, her voice breaking into a shriek. "No! This is fraud! She's nothing but a leech!" Bailiffs moved swiftly, gripping her arms as she kicked and screamed, her protest dissolving into echoes down the hall. I sat still, tears sliding freely as I squeezed Eleanor's frail hand. She turned her face toward me, her voice a whisper, but sharp with pride. "You've won, my dear, and you've earned every bit of it." Her words filled the silence left behind by their defeat, and for the first time, I felt the scale tip entirely in my favor. Justice had spoken, and it bore my name. The verdict rippled outward like a shockwave, and soon the city itself seemed to hum with my name. Newspaper stands carried my photograph across the front pages. Headlines bold and defiant. "Adopted daughter wins justice over wealthy family." The photo wasn't of a woman cast as a burden or an opportunist. It was of me standing straight-backed, hands folded with calm determination, a figure who had finally spoken and been heard. Television anchors replayed clips of the trial, their voices echoing through living rooms across the country. The sight of Elaine screaming into the cameras, her own words turned against her, was replayed so many times it became a symbol of arrogance unraveling. For the first time in my life, the public wasn't laughing at me. They were listening. When a local station asked for a live interview, I felt the familiar tremor of fear. Cameras had always been used to twist my story, to cut my life into pieces that fit their cruel headlines. But this time, I knew the story would come from my lips. I sat under the hot studio lights, the host across from me, and spoke plainly. "The hardest part of this fight wasn't about inheritance," I said, my voice carrying further than I expected. "It was living under a roof where I was never treated as a daughter. Every day I was reminded that I was an outsider. The ruling doesn't just return stolen money, it restores dignity, not just for me, but for every child who has been told they are less because they were adopted." The studio fell into silence, the kind that vibrates because people are holding their breath. Then applause broke, rising like a tide, spreading into homes through the broadcast. Later, letters and messages poured in, adoptees, foster children, people who had lived years in the shadows. Their words echoed the same sentiment. "Thank you for saying what we could not." I walked out of that interview with my shoulders lighter than they had ever been. A weight I'd carried for decades had finally fallen away. Not because the past had changed, but because I had claimed it for what it was and refused to be silent anymore. The weeks that followed were a blur of signatures, legal filings, and headlines. But beneath the public storm, the private truth lingered. Eleanor was fading. Her steps grew slower, her breaths shallower, her body more fragile with each passing day. I spent hours at her bedside, lavender filling the air from the sachets she kept by her dresser. She slept often, but when her eyes opened, they still glimmered with the fire that had fueled her voice in court. One evening, she reached for my hand, her fingers cool but steady. "Clarabelle," she whispered, voice thin but unshaken, "never let them define you. You are my legacy, not because of what I've left you, but because you found the strength to fight when they wanted you silent." Tears slid down my cheeks as I leaned closer, inhaling the familiar scent of her hair, silver and soft against my cheek. I whispered back that I would carry her words always, that I would honor her not with money, but with the life I built. A few nights later, she slipped away in her sleep, her face serene, her hand still loosely curled in mine. The grief that tore through me was raw, but beneath it pulsed something stronger, the unshakable truth that she had left me more than wealth. She had given me a universe of strength, and the permission to live defined not by their cruelty, but by my own resilience. A year later, I stood inside the glass tower of the Eleanor Foundation, the charity I built in her honor to protect foster children who had been cast aside like I once was. On the walls, photographs of smiling children glowed with hope. The headlines no longer labeled me as the adopted daughter chasing inheritance. Now, I was written about as a leader, a woman who turned scars into strength. A financial magazine even declared, "Clarabelle Thornton, the woman who turned pain into legacy." And my former family? Harold and Margaret sold everything, retreating to a cramped apartment. Victor's marriage dissolved under debts, and Elaine's empire collapsed into bankruptcy, her name tarnished. One day, she sent me an email begging forgiveness, even money. I deleted it without hesitation. They had destroyed themselves with greed. Stepping onto the balcony, Portland's sunset washed over me. Eleanor's words echoed softly. The sweetest revenge isn't destroying them. It's building the life they never believed you could. And I knew I had done exactly that.